I did a study in 2014 of the Nativity, and as part of that study was the Galilean weddings in the first century. I wanted to understand the process that Mary and Joseph had gone through. Then in 2016, I was asked to do a video of that Nativity study. And it was a 1-hour video, but for the sake of time today, I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version of just the wedding part. I'll share the Nativity study with you in another video. Okay? Well, this particular wedding custom is unique to Galilee. And it's important because this is the custom that Jesus and the disciples would have been familiar with. See, people in that day, and I suppose today as well, do not understand the nature of God's kingdom. So Jesus used people's cultures to communicate the spiritual nature of God more deeply. And by using the Galilean wedding, the disciples were better able to understand the purpose of the cross. And likewise, I suppose, if we have a better understanding of the Galilean wedding, then we too can better understand the purpose of the cross. Now, the Galilean wedding starts with a betrothal between a groom and his bride-to-be. Both families would meet at the city gates because, well, that's where the elders would gather. The elders are required to ratify all covenants. Now, as news of this betrothal was announced, everyone that was able would rush to the gates to witness this event. And it would begin with the reading of the covenant of marriage, or the contract of marriage by today's culture. This is written by the father of the groom, and it is read in the presence of the elders and witnesses. The reading of the covenant ensures that there can be no misunderstandings between the families later on. No one could say that they never knew. Well, then the gifts were exchanged between families, and the most important one being the bridal fee that's paid to the bride's father. Now, this isn't a purchase of the bride. It is paid to guarantee the care of the bride if anything were to happen to the groom before the wedding feast could take place. After this bridal fee is accepted, the groom is handed a pitcher of wine and a cup. The groom would pour the wine into the cup and pass the cup to his bride. Now, this is the moment of truth. The bride holds the final authority to accept or reject the betrothal. If she drinks, she signifies that she accepts the groom and the covenant. Or she can push the cup back and reject the groom and the covenant. Now, if the bride drinks and accepts, then she passes the cup back to the groom, and the groom then drinks from the cup. This solidifies the covenant. Now the groom says something profound. He says, "You are now consecrated to me by the laws of Moses, and I will not drink of this again until I drink it anew with you in my Father's house." Now this finishes the betrothal section of the process. The couples are now legally bound together, and it would take a divorce to break this covenant. And the families go their separate ways, back to their houses, and the preparations for the wedding feast begins. But during this time, the groom must leave his bride and live apart from her. There's a lot to do before the feast could take place. See, they must prepare for the day that they are reunited. Well, the groom's father, he must plan the feast and invite the guests and make for provisions for the day that the feast would take place. The groom begins to build a new room onto his father's house in preparations for his bride. And this includes crafting new furniture, acquire oil lamps, rugs, and even dishes for the feast that will take place at his father's house. The bride and her bridesmaids must prepare for the hour that the groom returns. This includes that they must put together their dresses, which will take many months since materials are rare and they might need to wait for merchants to come into town and sell them the materials that they need. When the dresses are finished, the bride must remain vigilant and pure, waiting for the groom, no matter how long it would take. And it could take more than a year. Now, if she didn't remain pure for him, the laws allowed the groom to stone her to death. It's a harsh punishment, but those were the laws. So, when would the groom return for his bride? Well, neither the groom nor the bride would know. Only the groom's father knew when it would take place. He would determine the day and the hour for the groom to retrieve his bride. Now, the bride is not concerned about the day or the hour. All she is concerned about is the preparations. She must keep herself pure. Now, the bride and her bridesmaids, they would sleep in their dresses so that they are always ready for the groom's return. Because in ancient Galilee, the hour of the groom's return was always in the night. Then that hour arrives, and on that night, the groom's father wakes the groom up and says, "Go, get your bride." The groom wakes up with excitement and grabs a shofar. He begins to blow it, waking up the village and announcing his return for the bride. The groomsmen grab a litter that was prepared. Now, the litter is basically just a seat attached to poles. The bride and the bridesmaids, they hear the shofar blow. They wake up and they go out into the streets and they wait for the groom. When the groom arrives in front of the bride's house and sees the bride dressed in her wedding dress, prepared and waiting, what an exciting time that would be, wouldn't it? The litter is presented to the bride. She sits in the litter, where she is then lifted up by the groomsmen, and she is carried off to the groom's father's house. And the groom walks beside her. There's celebration in the streets as those villagers that were prepared join the procession and walk with them to the father's house. When they arrive at the father's house, those that were prepared, they enter the father's house and the feast begins. The doors are shut. They are not reopened again for 7 days. Those that were not prepared, they're not allowed in. And the bride and the groom are finally together again, reunited as one forever. Well, this is the Galilean wedding process. So how did Jesus use this to give a better understanding of the purpose of the cross? Well, we'll go back to the beginning. Just as the groom's father wrote the covenant of marriage, God the Father wrote the new covenant that is offered to us, the bride of Christ, His church. This new covenant can be found in the Bible. It contains all the conditions and the promises that are made to us. You may remember at the Last Supper, Matthew 26, it says, "Then he took the cup, gave thanks, and offered it to them, saying, 'Drink from it, all of you. This is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins.'" You see, Jesus, the groom, offers the cup to the disciples, and He's offering it to us. He said, "This is my blood, the new covenant, that is poured out for you." He's saying that His sacrifice on the cross would be for the forgiveness of our sins. This is the new covenant, the gospel of Jesus, His death on the cross, His resurrection from the grave, and His soon-to-be return. If we accept this new covenant, we can be His bride. It is now the moment to decide. The new covenant has been presented. Do you accept this covenant with Christ? Or do you push it away and reject Him? The decision is totally yours. Now, Matthew 26, it never says that Jesus drank from the cup He offered to the disciples. You see, the cup He was to drink from was the cross. To solidify the new covenant that He's offering to us, Jesus went to the cross as a sacrifice for our sins. After he offered the cup to the disciples, he said something profound. He said in Matthew 26:29, I tell you, I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now on until that day when I drink it anew with you in my Father's kingdom. Sound familiar? Well, the disciples were familiar with the wedding process. They understood exactly what he was saying. Remember what Jesus said in John 14:2. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also. Jesus tells his disciples that he was going back to his Father's house to prepare a place for those that accept the new covenant, his bride. And one day, he will return to get his bride and take her back with him. He said that where I am, there ye may be also. This is his promise to return for us, his bride. We call this return the rapture, the second coming of Christ. In the Galilean wedding, only the groom's father knew the day and the hour of the son's return for his bride. And Jesus tells us this in Mark 13:32. But of that day and that hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels which are in heaven, neither the Son, but only the Father. You see, only God the Father knows the day and hour when Jesus will return to receive his bride. So what are we to do until he returns? We are to keep ourselves pure and prepared for his return. And just as the bride in the Galilean wedding, we are not to concern ourselves with that day or the hour of his return. We are to concern ourselves only in the preparation for his return. And when Christ returns, he's going to blow the shofar, the trump shall sound, and those that are ready, those that are pure and prepared, will be taken up and carried away to the clouds to be reunited as one with him forever. And what an exciting day that will be. We will enter into the gates of the Father's house, and then the gates will be closed. We shall celebrate with him at the wedding feast. And just as the bride could be stoned to death if she is not pure and prepared, will those that are not ready, those that fell away, those that rejected the covenant of Jesus, they will face the wrath of God. Jesus will return as a thief in the night, and he warns us to remain vigilant and pure. So the choice is yours. Will you be ready and prepared for his return? Will you accept the covenant? Or will you face God's wrath?